Hey, I'm Libby Dankman. I'm a journalist, a Pacific Northwesterner, and starting next week, the host of Soundside, a new show about life in the Puget Sound region airing Monday through Thursday at noon. We want Soundside to be a place to meet your neighbors, like a great block party where everyone is invited, or gathering around a campfire to hang on every word of an unpredictable story and then sharing your own. Join the conversation next week at noon right here on KUOW or by searching for Soundside wherever you get your podcasts. Talk soon.
Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. The first big snow of winter is mostly behind us. But if you've been trying to get around recently, you've likely got a story to tell about it. And some places up north are still icy.
All right, here's another one at Linwood, 168th and 62nd. There's a 4-lane road here with slush and ice covering the sidewalks entirely still.
Seattle Times transportation reporter Mike Lindblom is going to explain why parts of the city are still an ice rink days later. But first, let's get you caught up. State health officials are hoping that millions of free COVID tests will bend infections down. Governor Inslee announced yesterday that 5.5 million rapid tests are on their way to Washington, along with 10 million masks. You'll eventually be able to get those sent right to you through a website that's still being set up. King County has bought an additional 700,000 tests that will be distributed by the Public Health Department. Turns out there wasn't a group of right-wing extremists open carrying downtown during the city's racial justice protests back in early June 2020. It was the SPD trying to divert actual real-life protesters by pretending to be monitoring a group of Proud Boys on the police radio channel. One officer involved told the Seattle Times he was looking to create a distraction in a high-pressure situation where SPD was shorthanded. But the city's police watchdog said yesterday the ruse went against department policies. According to the Times, though, it doesn't look like anyone will be disciplined since the two supervisors who okayed the misinformation have already left SPD. And no matter what you've heard, we haven't seen the last of the Guild Theater. The 102-year-old movie house on 45th and Wallingford has been closed for years. So when wrecking crews were spotted outside Tuesday, Seattle movie buffs and history types feared the worst. But it turns out they're just hauling away the damaged marquee and sign. Cairo reports that the property owned by Mark Cuban's 2929 Entertainment doesn't have a demolition permit at this time, but you want to stay tuned.
Every morning I walk through Cal Anderson Park to get to work, and this morning was incredibly icy. I cannot believe that the entire thing was uncrossable, basically. It's now a few hours later. It's the afternoon, and nothing has been cleared. It's still really icy. You can tell that some of it is melted because of the temperatures, but it doesn't look like anything has been done to try to get this ice cleared. It's pretty icy and pretty messy.
That's Crystal Valle talking about trying to get around the city by foot after last week's snow. Kevin Freitas in West Seattle struggled to walk his kindergartner to school through the icy streets.
And this morning he slipped and fell twice on the way to school, once in the neighborhood and once right near his school. The pathway that leads through the park was completely iced over.
Kevin said it was so bad he actually went back and just shoveled it. Most of last week's snow and ice has melted down by now, and it's not nearly as treacherous to get around. But that's part of the problem. Waiting for the snow to melt has traditionally been a big part of the way Seattle handles this kind of weather. The rain will take care of it. But this last storm didn't really work out that way, thanks to a cold snap. Property owners, landlords, business owners, and homeowners are legally required to shovel in front of their properties, but most don't. Seattle has about 2,300 miles of sidewalks, and the city is only responsible for around 15%, according to the Department of Transportation. Our friend Eula Scott Bino was born and raised in Seattle and says she's used to it.
You know, I just try to ignore it.
Eula owns a house in the Central District, and she doesn't shovel in front of her house. She says her strategy has worked in the past because thick snow is pretty unusual for Seattle.
This is absurd weather for us. This is as if a hurricane has hit and we're supposed to just bunker down and stay in.
But Seattle's conventional wisdom about sidewalks is baffling to newcomers from the East Coast and the Midwest who are used to a different response to the snow.
On the other hand, my late husband's from Boston, right? And there you do shovel with religion. And if you don't, your neighbors knock on your door in protest and tell you you're irresponsible. And so, I do, when in Rome. So I didn't shovel my walkway at all.
None of this is surprising to Seattle Times transportation reporter Mike Lindblom.
Sidewalks are just starting to come into the city's consciousness. They've been a political issue since about 2019, but there's still not a really strong plan to get them all cleared, and the general public is not used to shoveling them, and more often than not just leave the ice to build up for a few days until rain arrives.
You brought up a few things there. The first one I want to talk about, though, is the city's approach to sidewalks, because like you mentioned, they've tried to change some things around with the way we handle the snow on the actual roads. But what is it with the sidewalks that is the main problem? Is it just one thing, or is it a lot of things?
It's mostly one thing. People don't go out and shovel them. Now, there's reasons for that. Some are better than others. One change that has happened in the last couple of years is that the city now has a shoveling team. Seattle DOT tells me they had 45 people on it from a combination of agencies. And they'll go out, shovel some curb ramps, a few hundred of the curb ramps for wheelchairs. They hit some high-profile areas. One place that's constantly being looked at is the Denny Way overpass, where people walk from Capitol Hill to South Lake Union. 3 years ago, Safe Streets activists complained really loudly about that, and the city went out and cleared it. So there are places like that that Seattle DOT prioritizes, but they miss a lot of areas, and the city has a huge land area.
Yeah. I mean, I live in the city, and I have experienced this firsthand. What were you hearing from people who were trying to navigate the city sidewalks during this period?
I heard from a few people who slipped and fell. I almost took a dive myself in the neighborhood, walking down a hill, and had to walk into the street. That's something that's really an indignity to pedestrians and non-drivers, to have to go out in the road in order not to fall. And this is not just a Seattle situation. I saw a video yesterday in Linwood where somebody did that, stepped off the corner. I drove last week to Pedestrian, and there's a very busy intersection at 128th and Ambom where apartments are all over, very low income Latino neighborhood, ethnically diverse, people on foot, kids in a small park, shopping center. Folks are walking in the parking lot because it's more clear than the sidewalks, and the walkway itself was covered with slush next to a really busy bus stop. In fact, several busy bus stops on Ambom, folks in tennis shoes or regular work shoes going through there. And, Burien and White Center don't have a ton of resources to clear that kind of stuff. So it's somewhat of a complicated issue, but nonetheless, the situation was bad enough that people would walk into the street or into part of the intersection to keep their footing.
Yeah, that I actually think, Mike, is one of the most dangerous things about the city sidewalks during this scenario, is that people who decide they can't navigate the sidewalk for one reason or another end up in the street, which is a completely different safety situation. And I saw people go down during this storm. I saw a guy walking with a cane who went down a couple of times in front of me. I wonder, as much as the city tries to make an effort, like you said, the responsibility feels bigger than what's happening right now in this city with the situation.
Well, Seattle's political culture is not to confront people. You've seen that in a totally different realm with the arguments over fare enforcement. There's some towns where, we'll just throw you off the bus or train. Seattle, the culture is to take a different approach, not to go confront people. Seattle DOT says that they had inspectors travel around approximately 2,500 blocks of the city. To the best of my knowledge, there are no actual citations issued. They would hang literature on people's doors, said they would talk to folks. In any event, nobody is compelling anybody to do anything about snow and ice removal because it's really abhorrent in the political culture of the city currently. And you can imagine the outcry, especially when folks might have a legitimate reason. You know, they might be elderly, may not have enough money to get snow clearing equipment. There may be class or race discrimination in the citations. There's all kinds of reasons why the city would think long and hard about actually fining anybody for ice buildup outside their home or business.
You know, I'm so glad you brought up the culture piece here, because I know I'm responsible for shoveling the sidewalk in front of my house, and I go out there and do it, and maybe I'll do it for my neighbor, but I don't know if my neighbor would do it for his neighbor or another neighbor would do it for their neighbor. There really is a situation going on around here where the responsibility is shared whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and that's American life, right? You know, some communities have the culture where you go, your neighbor has a back injury, you shovel their yard for them, they give you a 6-pack of beer or a hot cider afterwards, and you all work it through together. Seattle doesn't have that kind of tradition. Maybe we don't have enough snow for that kind of tradition to take root.
You know, you mentioned we don't have enough snow for that kind of tradition. You were born and raised here. Has it always been this way?
Oh yes, certainly. I was 7 years old in January of 1969 when we had 45 inches of snow, and I was looking at the weather records. I think the biggest buildup at any given time was 37 inches, and that was up to my shoulders then, living near Aurora Village. There haven't been very many huge snow events in the recent decades. We've had 3 in the last 4 years that were noteworthy, and there was the event in 2008 where the city didn't salt the roadways and sidewalks and cost Mayor Nichols re-election.
I remember that.
But Seattle, as far as I know, Seattle's never had a period where either the city government or the public was gung-ho about shoveling sidewalks. Usually it's wet, soft snow that washes away in a couple of days. It's pretty rare to have an event such as this year or February 2019 or the 2008 episode where snow stays down for 3, 4, 5 days. That's the exception. Usually you're looking at a day or two before it's gone.
You know, our weather has gotten more extreme in years, and the heat wave this past summer was a reminder that things are definitely changing with the climate. You talked a little bit about new approaches. How likely is it that city leaders will change their approach in coming years?
Well, that's probably up to your listeners, but I'm not a climate scientist. I have no idea if snow events in the future are going to be more persistent or if it's going to stay frozen longer. There are things the city can do and maybe will do around the edges, like increase its emerald and gold routes to include certain residential streets. I can think of a whole lot of streets that aren't on that network that still have some strategic value, or maybe they do one every 3 or 4 blocks in the residential neighborhoods. Just thinking about the temperament of city council members and all the other issues they're juggling, I can see them nibbling around the edges, maybe having one hearing, giving some different direction to SDOT. Bruce Harrell may or may not make this a marquee issue when he's recruiting another transportation director. I have no idea where he is on this. It didn't come up, as far as I know, in the inauguration yet. It's the Seattle has some pretty deep and profound problems to solve besides this very acute but temporary problem of ice on the sidewalks. As bad as it is, it's easily forgotten.
Sure. Mike Lindblom, Seattle Times transportation reporter. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Have a great day.
Appreciate you listening. Caroline Chamberlain Gomez produced today's show, which is also made by Jason Pagano, Diana Opong, Jenny Cecil Moore, and Clare McGrane. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy.